Well, for years, the Manhattan real estate market has pretty much remained insulated from the poorly performing national markets. But what about surrounding boroughs in counties like Nassau and Suffolk? Well, who better to explain the real estate market than Darius Solomon, associate broker for Prudential Douglas-Elliman. Good morning, Darius.
Good morning.
So we're talking Queens and Long Island today. How has the real estate performed there compared to, say, Manhattan, which is always strong?
Well, the Manhattan market, everybody had seen in the past quarter, showed some amazing results, especially since last year. Now, the Queens, Long Island markets did actually mimic a little bit more closely to the rest of the country. And if you look at some of the average sales price, again, this is looking at Queens only, $490,000, which is slightly lower, 1.6% reduction. But if you look at the number of sales, an increase of 42%. So there's a lot of activity. Yeah. It's important also to look at the average markets overall. When you look at the first, these were just a quarter, that was a quarterly graphic.
Okay, is it normally this quarter a very busy buying quarter, so that it's not necessarily
the second quarter
jump?
Is definitely the one where people start to come back out. If you look at the overall year, from the second quarter of 2006 to the second quarter of 2007, we did see an increase in inventory of about 10%. We saw about a 5%, almost 6% reduction in sales. And it took about 30 days longer to sell the average property. Now, if you look at the national market, what's interesting is that the net effect of all that is the average price of a Queens, Long Island property only really dropped less than 1%, 0.3%, compared if you look at a national basis.
So it's still quite strong.
It's still strong. I mean, the national basis was 10%, so that's quite a difference. And now, in each area, it's important to note that there's differences between the demographics, the types of properties, condos, single-family homes in Queens and Nassau and Suffolk County.
Okay, take us out to Nassau County, if you will. Well, I live in Nassau. Our assessment goes up every year as if our property values are rising, but our actual home sales are still strong in Nassau.
Well, we did see, again, in this quarter, an increase to the average price of $575,000, which is 3.4 increase over, that's for Nassau, and from the prior quarter. Sales increased, again, it's about 16%, not as sudden as the Queens market, but you have to also understand there's a lot more property to be sold in Queens.
A lot of folks in Nassau are complaining that their homes are on the market a lot longer. So are you seeing a little bit of a slowing? There's
definitely. We saw about a month increase in the time. So you're talking about 90 to a little bit more than 90 days for a property to sell. And that's especially if it's priced properly.
Before we get on to Suffolk, what do you do with that information? If you're a buyer or a seller, is it a good time to buy, not a good time, or it does not affect that?
Well, it's a matter of what the reason for selling and or moving on. If you bought your house 10 years ago, you're definitely going to see an increase in your profits.
Of course.
If you just bought over the prior year, again, we've always mentioned when we've talked about, regardless of where you're buying, be it in Manhattan, be it in the boroughs, that you take into consideration long-term purchases, because that gives you time to weather a bad market and a good market. But from the buyer-seller standpoint, again, it's a matter of looking at the type of property you need. As we move along, we anticipate, unless inventory increases considerably or interest rates change, it'll probably slow down a little bit in summer. Spring is the big time, and we'll start to see where things trend in September.
But we're not seeing a huge drop-off. Before you go, though, let's take a look at Suffolk County. Does that follow more of the national trend because it's less urban?
No. Again, Suffolk, you'll start to see some average lower prices, about $426. There was, again, about a 5% increase and a 15% increase in the amount of units sold. Days on market, again, increased a little bit. But again, historically, if you look at these prices, we've seen slight increases from second quarter to first quarter to second quarter. And for the year, again, there hasn't been that big of a drop compared to some of the national markets.
Right, so it really shows that Queens and Long Island are almost as strong as Manhattan.
As strong.
They're holding their own.
They're holding on. There have been increased sales. It's not the Manhattan market. Manhattan has remained fairly insulated from the rest of the markets, but it hasn't responded as severely as some of the national markets have.
All right, Darius Solomon from Prudential Douglas-Elliman, thanks so much for clearing that up.
Always a pleasure.